Pacific Theater, early 1942. The nascent Allied radar systems, still crude and temperamental, began to cast their electronic nets across vast stretches of ocean and sky, offering the first inkling of an unseen threat. These flickering green lines on cathode ray tubes represented a fundamental shift in naval warfare, promising to strip away the protective cloak of night and distance that had long governed maritime engagements. The stakes were immense. Control of the Pacific, decided by who could see first and strike first, in an environment where visibility often meant survival. Aboard the USS Chicago, Lieutenant Commander John B. Phelps, a pre-war electrical engineer now tasked with overseeing the ship's CXAM-1 air search radar, meticulously calibrated its antenna. This bulky, rotating array, an early iteration of shipborne radar, emitted pulses at a frequency of 200 MHz, a wavelength of 1.5 meters. The CXAM-1, one of the first production models, could detect a single aircraft at 50 nautical miles and a formation at 90 under optimal conditions. Its maximum range against surface targets, though less reliable, extended to 15 nautical miles, a significant advantage over even the most vigilant human lookout. The CXAM-1's components, a magnetron transmitter, a dipole antenna array, and a rudimentary A-scope display, represented the cutting edge of Allied electronic warfare. Each unit, weighing approximately 12,000 pounds, required a dedicated crew of 4 technicians for continuous operation and maintenance. Production logs from RCA and Western Electric indicated a total of 20 CXAM-1 units delivered to the U.S. Navy by late 1941, primarily for installation on battleships and heavy cruisers, ensuring a limited but critical deployment across the fleet's most valuable assets. The strategic implication of such technology was profound, offering the potential to negate surprise attacks, particularly from torpedo planes and submarines. This capability stood in stark contrast to the prevailing naval doctrine, which still heavily relied on visual scouting and the element of surprise for offensive operations. The ideological chasm between those who embraced this new, invisible form of reconnaissance and those who clung to established methods would soon define the Pacific conflict. The initial reports from these early radar installations were often met with skepticism, sometimes dismissed as equipment malfunctions or atmospheric interference. Yet, the data slowly accumulated, painting a picture of distant contacts, often hours before they could be visually confirmed. The quiet hum of the radar sets, often relegated to the background noise of a warship, was steadily becoming the silent heartbeat of a new era of naval engagement. The Imperial Japanese Navy, in its own earlier forays, had not been entirely blind to the concept of radio detection. Initial experiments with what they termed radio rangefinders commenced in the mid-1920s, a period marked by a global race in wireless technologies. These early prototypes, often bulky and temperamental, were largely confined to shore-based installations, their primary function envisioned as coastal defense and fleet tracking within home waters. By 1935, the Naval Technical Research Institute had developed a more advanced system, the Type 11, which operated on a wavelength of 3 meters. This unit, weighing approximately 2.5 tons, required a dedicated power supply and a substantial antenna array, limiting its practical deployment to larger vessels or fixed positions. Testing revealed a detection range of roughly 70 kilometers against a battleship-sized target, a capability that, while promising on paper, was often hampered by atmospheric interference and the primitive state of signal processing. Production logs indicate that fewer than 10 Type 11 units were ever fully manufactured and installed. The operational experience gained from these limited deployments was mixed. While some officers recognized the potential for early warning, others viewed the technology as unreliable and overly complex, demanding specialized personnel for its maintenance and interpretation. The prevailing doctrine emphasized visual observation and hydrophone detection as the primary means of target acquisition, a philosophy deeply ingrained in their naval tradition. This institutional skepticism was further solidified by a series of internal reports in 1938, which highlighted the Type 11's susceptibility to jamming and its limited ability to distinguish between multiple targets. The investment required for widespread deployment, both in terms of manufacturing capacity and crew training, was deemed disproportionate to its perceived tactical benefit. Naval strategists focused on decisive surface engagements and the precision of optical rangefinding saw little immediate advantage in a system that offered only ambiguous, distant contacts. Consequently, development slowed, and the existing units were often relegated to secondary roles or allowed to fall into disrepair. The opportunity to integrate radar into their fleet doctrine, to understand its nuances and limitations before the crucible of war, was largely foregone. The decision, though seemingly logical within the prevailing strategic framework, left the Imperial Navy unprepared for the technological shifts that would redefine naval combat. The Japanese naval doctrine, forged in the crucible of the Russo-Japanese War and refined through decades of meticulous training, placed an almost sacred emphasis on the human eye. Officers and ratings alike underwent rigorous optical acuity drills, their vision honed to discern the subtle wakes of distant vessels or the faint outlines of land against a moonless sky. This commitment to visual detection was not merely a preference, but a foundational pillar of their strategic planning, particularly for night engagements, where the element of surprise could be decisive. Their torpedo technology, exemplified by the formidable Type 93 Long Lance, was designed for precisely these close-quarters, low-visibility encounters. With its oxygen-fueled propulsion and warhead packing 490 kilograms of Chameau's explosive, the Type 93 possessed a range of 40 kilometers at 36 knots, far exceeding the capabilities of contemporary Allied torpedoes. This weapon system, coupled with superior night optics and extensive practical exercises, fostered a profound confidence in their ability to dominate nocturnal naval battles, often without firing a single shot from their main batteries. Production logs from the Curry Naval Arsenal confirm a sustained output of these advanced torpedoes, reaching a peak of 2,400 units manufactured in 1942 alone, alongside a parallel investment in high-magnification binoculars and specialized night vision periscopes. The strategic implication was clear. The Japanese expected to close with an enemy under the cover of darkness, launch a devastating torpedo attack, and disengage before their presence was fully registered. This doctrine, while effective against an enemy similarly reliant on visual contact, did not account for a paradigm shift in detection technology. Interrogation files from captured Japanese officers consistently reveal a deep-seated skepticism regarding Allied radar capabilities, often dismissed as unreliable, easily jammed, or prone to false positives. One captured officer, after the Battle of the Java Sea, remarked, "Our eyes are our radar." This ideological commitment to the organic sensor, honed by tradition and success in previous conflicts, became a significant blind spot. The perceived clumsiness of early Allied radar sets, with their large antennas and relatively short ranges, reinforced this dismissal, preventing a serious reevaluation of their own detection methods. The absence of a comparable indigenous radar development program meant that the Imperial Japanese Navy entered the conflict with a critical technological disadvantage. While rudimentary radar sets such as the Type 21 air search radar, were eventually deployed, their performance lagged significantly behind Allied equivalents, offering neither the range nor the precision for effective fleet-wide integration. This disparity in electronic detection capabilities would prove increasingly costly as the war progressed, fundamentally altering the dynamics of naval engagement. The Solomon Islands, August 1942. The cruiser Quincy moved through the pre-dawn darkness of Iron Bottom Sound, its radar operators scanning the black expanse. On its bridge, Captain Samuel N. Moore relied on visual lookouts, the nascent technology of radar still a novelty to many, its reports often considered secondary to human eyes. The radar, a CXAM set, swept its 200-kilowatt pulse across the water, its antenna rotating at 4 revolutions per minute. The CXAM, an early American naval radar, operated on a wavelength of 1.5 meters, offering a maximum range against surface targets of approximately 15 nautical miles, though atmospheric conditions and target size could significantly alter this. Its display, a simple A-scope, showed blips as vertical deflections, requiring skilled interpretation to discern range and bearing. This particular unit, weighing 1.5 tons, represented a significant investment in a technology still undergoing rapid battlefield evaluation. Compared to the British Type 271, a 10-centimeter wavelength set that offered superior resolution and detection of smaller targets, the CXAM was less precise, yet its fundamental capability remained revolutionary. The British, having faced the Luftwaffe's night attacks, had prioritized radar development earlier, deploying sets like the Type 79 for early warning and the Type 271 for surface search. American production, though accelerating, had only yielded 50 CXAM units by late 1942, reflecting the nascent stage of its widespread naval integration. The strategic implication of radar's presence was profound, shifting the paradigm of naval combat from purely visual encounters to engagements where unseen forces could dictate terms. The Japanese, having largely dismissed the operational utility of radar in their early war doctrine, focused instead on superior optics and well-honed night fighting tactics. This ideological commitment to traditional methods blinded them to the emerging threat, fostering a dangerous overconfidence in their established prowess. The quiet hum of the CXAM's magnetron, a component producing the microwave pulses, represented a subtle but fundamental shift in naval warfare. Its output, a series of precisely timed energy bursts, translated the physical world into electrical signals, allowing a new form of perception. This unseen perception, still largely misunderstood by its adversaries, would soon begin to unravel established naval power dynamics. A report from Quincy's radar log noted multiple contacts bearing 270, range 12 miles, minutes before Japanese searchlights illuminated the Allied column. The subsequent battle, a chaotic night engagement, saw the Allied forces surprised, yet the radar had provided the first unheeded warning. The Japanese, emerging from the darkness, executed their maneuvers with devastating precision, their long-lance torpedoes finding their marks. Damage reports from the Battle of Savo Island indicated the loss of 4 Allied heavy cruisers and damage to several others, a stark testament to the effectiveness of Japanese night combat doctrine. The Japanese force, under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, suffered no losses, yet the initial radar contacts, though not fully acted upon, represented a nascent capability that would soon turn the tide in similar dark encounters. Production logs from the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ships show a rapid increase in radar unit fabrication following the early Solomon Islands engagements, with orders for new, more advanced sets like the SG-1 being accelerated. The SG-1, operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength, promised significantly improved resolution and target discrimination over the CXAM, with initial deployment slated for early 1943. This shift reflected a growing institutional recognition of radar's critical role, The strategic implication of this technological gap was not immediately apparent to all Japanese commanders. Their successes in the early war, often achieved through superior or training and bold tactics, reinforced a belief in their own invincibility, particularly at night. This hubris, rooted in past victories, prevented a thorough reevaluation of their intelligence regarding Allied technological advancements. The quiet, almost imperceptible blips on the radar screen, though initially disregarded, were the first whispers of a new era of naval warfare. They spoke of an unseen presence, a technological advantage that would, in time, become the deciding factor in the vast, dark emptiness of the Pacific. The aftermath of the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay, November 1943, brought forth a series of internal Japanese Navy reports attempting to account for the disproportionate losses. Admiral Koga Mineichi, commander of the combined fleet, received initial assessments that frequently cited poor visibility and exceptional enemy luck as primary factors for the American success. These explanations, often originating from surviving officers of the 5th Cruiser Division, consistently downplayed any technological disparity, focusing instead on environmental conditions and the unpredictable nature of night engagements. Naval Intelligence Section 10, tasked with analyzing enemy capabilities, received multiple combat reports detailing the precision of American torpedo attacks and gunfire in conditions where Japanese lookouts reported no visual contact. One report from the heavy cruiser Miyako described incoming shellfire appearing from an unseen adversary, a phenomenon attributed to an unnatural advantage rather than a systematic technological one. The prevailing institutional bias favored traditional observational methods and the perceived superiority of Japanese night fighting doctrine, which had historically relied on superior optics and rigorous training. Production logs from the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal indicated a sustained focus on optical rangefinders and night binoculars throughout 1943, with monthly output averaging 1,200 units of various types. In contrast, the development and deployment of indigenous radar systems, such as the Type 21 air search radar, remained limited to larger capital ships and were primarily viewed as an auxiliary for air defense, not surface engagement. The strategic implication of this technological gap was profound. While American fleets were beginning to integrate radar as a primary targeting and navigation tool, Japanese naval doctrine remained anchored to visual engagement, a critical miscalculation in the evolving nature of naval warfare. Interrogation files from captured American sailors, though limited in number, contained consistent references to radar as a tool for detecting and tracking Japanese vessels at night. These reports, however, were often dismissed by Japanese intelligence analysts as enemy propaganda or exaggerated claims designed to sow confusion. The institutional inertia, coupled with a deep-seated belief in the qualitative superiority of Japanese naval personnel and equipment, created a significant blind spot regarding the true nature of Allied technological advancements. Damage reports from the Solomon Islands campaign, particularly after the engagements off Cape St. George in November 1943, showed a clear pattern of Japanese destroyers being engaged and sunk with minimal or no reciprocal damage to American vessels. The official explanation, disseminated within the combined fleet, consistently emphasized the reckless aggression of American forces and the unfortunate convergence of multiple factors against Japanese formations. The possibility of an unseen all-weather detection and targeting system was systematically excluded from serious consideration, solidifying a fatal misunderstanding of the operational environment. The Pacific, October 1944. The American carrier aircraft, guided by unseen pulses, descended through the night with an unnerving precision. Radar, once a nascent technology, had matured into a decisive instrument of war, its capabilities now fully integrated into offensive operations. Naval air units, equipped with improved airborne intercept (AI) radar, could now detect and track Japanese surface vessels from distances exceeding 80 kilometers. Even in conditions of absolute darkness or heavy weather, this expanded detection range allowed for the meticulous planning of attack vectors circumventing traditional visual scouting limitations. The AN/APS-4 radar, mounted on TBF Avengers and SB-2C Helldivers, provided a clear, synthetic image of the ocean's surface, transforming the chaos of night operations into a calculated engagement. Japanese naval doctrine, however, continued to emphasize visual identification and engagement, a legacy of their early war successes. Production logs from the Yokosuka Naval Air Technical Arsenal confirm that radar development for offensive air-to-surface roles remained a low priority, with only experimental units deployed to a handful of reconnaissance aircraft. The strategic implication was a widening chasm in situational awareness, particularly after dusk. The Battle of Surigao Strait, October 25, 1944, provided a stark illustration of this disparity. American destroyers, arrayed in a classic crossing the T formation, unleashed torpedoes guided by SG-1 surface search radar at ranges up to 20 kilometers. Damage reports from the USS Remy indicate multiple radar-directed torpedo hits on the Japanese battleship Yamashiro, before any visual contact was established by the Japanese command. Interrogation files of captured Japanese naval officers consistently reveal a profound underestimation of Allied radar capabilities, often dismissed as unreliable or easily jammed. This institutional skepticism, rooted in early, less effective Allied radar deployments, persisted even as the technology rapidly advanced. The belief in superior night vision and training, a hallmark of Japanese naval prowess, became a fatal anachronism. The cumulative effect was a relentless attrition of Japanese naval assets under conditions that once favored them. Production figures from the Kure Naval Arsenal show a steady decline in new ship construction, while American shipyards maintained an accelerating output. The strategic balance shifted irrevocably, not merely in numbers, but in the fundamental ability to detect, track, and engage. The silence of the night, once a shield, had become a conduit for unseen destruction. The Philippine Sea, June 1944. The American Fifth Fleet, under Admiral Raymond Spruance, advanced toward Saipan, its carriers launching strikes against Japanese airfields. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commanding the first mobile fleet, planned a decisive engagement, confident in the superior range of his land-based aircraft and the greater effective radius of his carrier planes, which could strike at 500 nautical miles compared to the American F-6F Hellcats 300. Ozawa's strategy hinged on striking first and withdrawing before the American carriers could retaliate effectively. His scout planes, however, were detected by American radar pickets, specifically the newly deployed AN/APS-2 airborne radar on Avenger torpedo bombers, extending the fleet's defensive perimeter far beyond visual range. These early warnings allowed American fighters to be vectored precisely, intercepting Japanese formations often 100 miles or more from the carrier groups. The American combat air patrols, guided by Combat Information Center (CIC) operators interpreting radar scopes, achieved unprecedented interception rates. During the first major engagement on June 19, later dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, 373 Japanese aircraft were shot down by American fighters and anti-aircraft fire, while the U.S. Navy lost only 29 planes. Damage reports confirm that 430 Japanese carrier aircraft were destroyed across the 2 days of battle, effectively eliminating the trained air crews vital for future operations. Ozawa's subsequent attempts to launch strikes were met with similar, devastating results. His fleet, though still largely intact, was rendered blind and toothless, its offensive capability annihilated. The loss of air cover made his carriers vulnerable to American submarine attacks, which sank the Taiho and the Shokaku on June 19, each struck by multiple torpedoes. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 1944, underscored the persistent technological disparity. American destroyers and cruisers, equipped with SG and SK radar systems, detected the approaching Japanese center force through Surigao Strait in the pre-dawn darkness of October 25. The Japanese, lacking comparable radar, were operating largely by visual contact and primitive hydrophone arrays. The subsequent engagement in Surigao Strait became the last battleship versus battleship action in history, a stark demonstration of radar-guided gunnery. 6 American battleships, survivors of Pearl Harbor, crossed the T of the Japanese fleet, their 14-inch and 16-inch guns firing with devastating accuracy from ranges exceeding 20,000 yards, well beyond the effective visual range at night. Damage assessments confirm that the Japanese battleships Fuso and Yamashiro were sunk, along with 3 destroyers, within minutes. American destroyers, guided by radar, launched torpedo attacks with pinpoint precision, sinking the Japanese cruiser Mogami and several destroyers. The Japanese command, operating in an information vacuum compared to their adversaries, struggled to coordinate their forces, their tactical responses often delayed or misdirected. The first striking force lost 2 battleships, 1 carrier, 4 cruisers, and 9 destroyers. The strategic implication of these battles was profound. The Japanese Navy's capacity for large-scale, coordinated offensive operations was irrevocably broken. Their carrier air groups were decimated, their capital ships sunk or crippled, and their high command remained fundamentally unable to counter the pervasive advantage of Allied radar. The Pacific War's naval phase had reached its inevitable conclusion. The Imperial Japanese Navy's high command, confronted with the undeniable evidence of radar's impact, began to commission countermeasures, though often with a profound delay. Initial efforts focused on passive detection with the development of the Type 3 radar detector, a rudimentary receiver designed to alert ships to incoming radar emissions. Production logs from the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal indicate that by late 1943, only 40 units had been manufactured, a number insufficient to equip even a single major fleet. This detector, while capable of identifying the presence of a radar signal, offered no directional information and provided no indication of the emitting platform's range or bearing. Crews reported frequent false positives from atmospheric interference, leading to a general distrust of the equipment. Interrogation files from captured Japanese naval personnel consistently cited a lack of confidence in the Type 3, often leading to its deactivation during critical periods of engagement. Simultaneously, a more ambitious project for an indigenous Japanese search radar, the Type 22, began in earnest after the Midway losses. This system, operating on a 10-centimeter wavelength, aimed to replicate the capabilities of captured Allied designs. However, chronic shortages of magnetron tubes and high-frequency components, exacerbated by the Allied submarine campaign's impact on resource shipments, severely hampered its development and deployment. Production reports from Mitsubishi Electric in 1944 show that while 200 Type 22 units were eventually produced, their reliability remained poor, and their effective range was often less than half that of contemporary American systems. Many units suffered from frequent breakdowns and required constant specialized maintenance, a burden on already overstretched engineering crews. The strategic implication was that even when installed, these radars rarely provided the decisive early warning needed to alter the course of an engagement. Attempts to develop radar jamming technology, a logical next step, faced even greater hurdles. The lack of detailed intelligence on Allied radar frequencies and modulation techniques, combined with Japan's limited industrial capacity for sophisticated electronics, meant that any jamming efforts were largely speculative. Engineering schematics from the Imperial Japanese Navy Technical Department show several experimental jammers, but none progressed beyond prototype stage, and none were ever deployed operationally. The strategic failure to adequately address radar's dominance meant that Japanese fleets continued to operate with a fundamental informational disadvantage. Night engagements, once a Japanese strength due to superior optical training, became increasingly perilous as Allied radar-equipped ships could detect and fire upon Japanese vessels long before they were sighted. Damage reports from the Battle of Surigao Strait in October 1944, for instance, explicitly detail American destroyers firing torpedoes at unseen targets, guided solely by radar. Even the development of anti-radar coatings, a concept explored by German scientists, received only cursory attention in Japan. Material science reports from the Tokyo Imperial University's Department of Applied Chemistry indicate theoretical research into radar-absorbing paints, but no practical, scalable solution was ever achieved. The priority remained on increasing conventional warship production and aircraft output, diverting scarce resources from these more advanced, yet ultimately crucial, defensive technologies. The lingering blindness of the Imperial Japanese Navy, therefore, was not merely a matter of initial dismissal, but a sustained inability to adapt and innovate at the pace of their adversaries. The logistical and industrial chasm between Japan and the Allied powers became increasingly apparent in the domain of electronic warfare. By the end of 1944, the average Japanese heavy cruiser was equipped with a single, often unreliable, Type 20